Football is just under a month away, so we have to start looking at these schedules. Today we're going to be going through every team's schedule in both the AFC and NFC North and predicting all 8 teams' record. If you like sports podcasts, I'm telling you, this is the channel for you, as we do 2 podcasts a week, 2 sports podcasts, as well as 2 fantasy football episodes, as big news coming up on the fantasy side of things here. But if you enjoy at any point, please support us down below as we're on the road to 500 subs on the channel. That's the next big milestone, and we can't get there without you guys. As always, timestamps will be in the description of the video. Without further ado, this is the Anomaly Podcast. It's Owen. Let's start in Pittsburgh. Before we start in Pittsburgh, you see it on your screen now. I'm opening up the first ever fantasy football league here for the channel. So if you're interested in joining, go ahead and just hit me up on Instagram, right? Instagram is going to be the easiest way to contact me. Just go ahead and follow the account. DM me that you want in the league. I'll get your information. And of course, depending on how much interest and involvement we get in these leagues, I might even open up a second or even a third league. So if you're interested in a 12-team full PPR league and you'll be active, go ahead and hit us up over there on Instagram. Another thing, a word from our sponsor, as today, again, we're going to be going through 8 different teams' schedules, so we're going to do a lot of talking. We're going to need a cold drink to get us through this. I have my Reign next to me. If you guys know me, you know I love Reign energy drinks. I have it in this custom tumbler that Laura sent us out. Shout out to Life by Laura. If you're looking for any custom crafts, t-shirts, tumblers, anything of that sort, Laura does it all, as she's over on Facebook under the tag Life by Laura, or over on Instagram Life by Laura 2023. She does basically everything at your disposal, right? So go ahead and check her out on both of her pages to see her latest projects or future projects. But shout out to Life by Laura, today's sponsor. She hooked us up with this great cup here, and I couldn't be more grateful as she's the first sponsor on the channel. But without further ado, we're going to start here in Pittsburgh, as they have a total, I believe, of 4 primetime games this season. As in Week 2, they have a Monday Night Football game against the Browns. Week 3, it's Sunday night the following week there in Las Vegas. Week 9 against Tennessee, and Week 14 against New England. So they have 4 total primetime games, and 3 of them are home in Pittsburgh, right? But starting here in Week 1 against San Fran, right? San Fran, they had a disappointing end to last season with their quarterback injuries. They're coming into this season a little on the upset side, right? A little peed off is the way to put it. They come in, and I think even if it is in Pittsburgh, Pittsburgh shows a lot of promise, but Kyle Shanahan and Brock Purdy are just too much for Pittsburgh. They fall short in Week 1. So Pittsburgh already down to an 0-1 start. Then they go on Monday Night Football. They take care of the Browns. I think they win this game against the Browns on Monday night. TJ Watt has, tortured Deshaun Watson and his Browns team for a couple years now. He won the Defensive Player of the Year 2 years ago, I believe. So he's going to be back in that running this year. I think he might win the award again this year. So TJ Watt, when he's on the field, this team wins games. I think it can all start in Week 2 on primetime against the Cleveland Browns. In Week 3, I think they pick up some momentum. They go in there against Jimmy G in Las Vegas. Las Vegas has a lot of questions, right? I think that team's getting more publicity for the Davante Adams frustrations than what they could actually do on the field. I think Pittsburgh gets rolling. They go 2-1 after Week 3. Week 4, they take care of Houston. They go into Houston against a young C.J. Stroud, still trying to get his feet wet, still trying to get used to the actual NFL. But Mike Tomlin and TJ Watt, these are guys that are just winners, right? Mike Tomlin has never had a losing season as a head coach, so please remember that. But then also TJ Watt. TJ Watt, again, is a Defensive Player of the Year. He's a top 10 player in the NFL. I think they go in against a young quarterback at C.J. Stroud and take care of business. Boom. And then Week 5, right? Last week before the bye week, I think they take a loss here. I think, 3-1, their ego's a little bit high, even though that's uncharacteristic for Pittsburgh. They lose one to Baltimore, and then they are 3-2 going into the bye. Going into Week 7, though, they bounce back. They're 3-2. They bounce back here with a win after the loss to Baltimore against the Rams. The Rams have a lot of questions this year. They're in a really bad situation. And shout out to Madden. Madden it's going to come out here in a couple days, and I think the Rams might be my rebuilding team. Regardless, they win against the Rams, but then they fall against Jacksonville. You guys know I'm high on Jacksonville this year. I really think Jacksonville could be a top team in the AFC, and I just don't think Pittsburgh has enough to pull off the win there against Jacksonville, but then they bounce back in the AFC South, and they do beat the Tennessee Titans. So after the first half of the year, they are sitting at, what would that be, 4-3, right? So I think, or 5-3, So 5-3 in the first 9 weeks. I think you're pretty okay if you're a Pittsburgh fan, right? As this division is very tough. Might be the toughest in football. We're saying the AFC North. So if you're 5-3 after the first half of the year, you're still in a really good position to make the playoffs. Let's see if I have them doing that, though. I think in Week 10 against Jordan Love, I'm higher on Jordan Love than most people, as we'll see later. But I don't think Jordan Love, there's some questions up front with that Green Bay offensive line. I think TJ Watt and the rest of this Pittsburgh defense has their way in that game at home against a first-year starter in Jordan Love. Pittsburgh takes care of business to win 2 straight, but then they drop 2 straight. I think they lose to Cleveland at Cleveland, and then in Week 12, I think they lose at Cincy to the Bengals. So back-to-back divisional losses on the road for Pittsburgh after 2 straight wins. So boom, after being 5-3 at the midseason mark, they're now sitting here after Week 12 at 6-4, right, or 6-5. So again, they're gonna have to get some things going. They pick up a win against Arizona in Week 13. Arizona, we know they're terrible. They pick up a win against New England in Week 14. And then they pick up a win against Indianapolis in Week 15. This Pittsburgh schedule is very favorable, so I wouldn't be shocked if this team wins more than when I have them winning, as they face a lot of rookie quarterbacks or just bad teams this year. I guess that's how the schedule fell in their favor. So boom, they win 3 straight. They're in a really good position to make the playoffs, but I think they lose to Cincy. I think they get swept by Cincy this year. They go into Seattle, desperate for a win against Geno Smith and this rising offense in Seattle, playing against the 12th man in Seattle. I think they do lose that game, and I think they also lose the last game of the year to the Baltimore Ravens. Now, you'll see later with my Ravens prediction, but in the case that the Ravens are not exactly what I predict them to be, and they win 13 to 14 games, I can see Pittsburgh winning this game if Baltimore decides to sit their starters. But we know Baltimore, at least in my opinion, they're not going to be a 13-win team. So in this case, all the starters are playing for Baltimore, and I think Baltimore also sweeps the Pittsburgh Steelers. So the Pittsburgh Steelers, their season in review, Mike Tomlin, he keeps his streak alive. This team stays over 500 for the 15th straight season or whatever it is. So they don't have a losing season. They keep a winning record. Their young guys show a lot of promise this year. I think Najee gets back on track. Kenny Pickett takes a step up. This team is an amazing 4-0 in primetime games, this season. I think they just fall short in the end. They have a really tough end to their schedule with Cincy, Seattle, and Baltimore. I think, maybe they still make the playoffs at 9-8, but that is my prediction. I think the Steelers go 9-8 this year, finishing on the bottom half of the AFC North. I won't spoil who is above or below them. But moving over here to Baltimore, you see a lot of green, right, on this left side of your screen. But let's dive into it. Week 1 against Houston. Again, against C.J. Stroud's first career game, not including preseason, but Lamar's going to be back. This Ravens starters group is going to be back. There's a lot of hope and promise around this Ravens team this year with the new offensive coordinator and the new pass-happy mindset. I think they open up the year against a rookie quarterback with a win at home against Houston. Then they go to Cincinnati. I think they drop that game. Then they go to Week 3 against AR-15 and this young Colts team. I think they win that game. So they're 2-1 after 3 weeks, and then they head to Week 4 into Cleveland. And this might be a hot take, but I'm a Browns fan. I think we actually win this game. So after 4 weeks, this Ravens team is 2-2. There's not a lot that's changed. The narrative starts to get out there. Was Todd Monken or was their old Greg Roman, that's his name, was Greg Roman really the issue? Was the run-heavy scheme really the issue if this team is 500 after the first month of the year? But then they answer those questions, right? They start to get it going. From weeks 5 through 9, I think this team wins 5 straight games. At Pittsburgh, I think they win that game. Week 6 against Tennessee, at that point, we might see Will Levis at the quarterback position. I think Baltimore wins that game at home. And then they're home against Detroit. Big game, right, against Detroit. Detroit's a really promising team this year. But I do think Baltimore can edge them out at home, remember, against Detroit. Then they go to Arizona, right? Arizona, even if they are home, they don't have a home field advantage. The Ravens go on the road and take care of business there, as that might be Kyler Murray's first game back, Week 8. But even if it isn't, right, even if it is, rather, if it's Kyler Murray's first game back going against a tough Ravens defense, it's not going to be easy in your first week back. So I think they win that game as well, 4-game win streak, and then they host the Seattle Seahawks. Seattle's a really, really good home team. On the road, not so much, and I think Baltimore can take care of business. And at the midseason mark, this team is 7-2. They look like they're competing at a very high level. This Ravens team is winning because we know that when Lamar Jackson plays, this is a team that wins like 75% of the time. So the Ravens, we know what they can do when healthy, and I think Lamar and them are 7-2 at the midseason mark. Then you move over to the right side of your screen. I think they continue this 5-game win streak. I think they host the Cleveland Browns. They beat them. Then they host the Cincinnati Bengals. They beat them. They are 9-2 after 11 weeks in the season. I think their ego is super high at this point. I think, Lamar Jackson, Odell, they're having a really good season. But then I will say, since their ego gets in the way, I think they fall one late to the Los Angeles Chargers in Week 12. The Chargers maybe went on a field goal or something, and 9-3 going into the bye week, right? So the Ravens, really good position for the number 1 seed in the AFC. I think they beat the Rams after the bye week. That's a gimme. But then they go at Jacksonville, at San Fran, and home against Miami. Those are 3 teams that I have as Super Bowl contenders, and I think the Ravens are going to drop all 3 of them. I think they lose in Jacksonville at Week 15. I think they lose to San Fran at Week 16. And then I think they lose to Miami in Week 17 because Miami gets their revenge from last season. But I do think at this point, if they're 10-6, they're desperate for a win. Maybe they're fighting for a playoff spot. I do think they close out the year against Pittsburgh with a win. So again, this prediction for Baltimore is assuming that everyone can stay healthy, that Lamar can be healthy, that Odell can be healthy. Again, it's in a perfect world. That's not going to happen. But I'm assuming that everyone is at full health for this Ravens team. But this is a team that is, again, 10-3 at one point in the year with a stretch of 7 straight wins under their belt. They do mellow out towards the end of the season with multiple tough games in a row with those 3 Super Bowl contenders. But all of those games are on primetime. So I think, in short, I think this team is 1-3 in primetime, but they still finish as 11-6. They still make the playoffs, and they do look like a legit threat to maybe sneak into the Super Bowl conversation because they won 7 straight games against some formidable opponents. Again, 11-6 record for the Baltimore Ravens. Moving over to the Cincinnati Bengals, you see a lot of the same there for the Cincinnati Bengals, as in the first 6 weeks of the season, I think they win all 6 of them. Again, this is my Super Bowl contender. We'll talk about that here in a second. But I think they open up the year against the Browns. Joe Burrow, if he's not worrying about Patrick Mahomes, he's always hearing about this Cleveland Browns stigma. He can't beat the Cleveland Browns. Now, last year was an anomaly, no pun intended, as he was very successful against the Cleveland Browns last year. But I think this year he wants to prove that. He wants to put an end to that stigma around his career. So I think he opens up the year fired up. Even though he's in Cleveland, I think he gets a win. Then he's moving over to Baltimore at home. I think they take care of Baltimore. I talked about it with the Ravens schedule. I think the Bengals prove a point here in Week 2. And then Week 3 against the Rams. The Rams, again, they're more focused on Caleb Williams than anybody else. The Bengals take care of business here early to start 3-0. Then you move to Tennessee. In Tennessee against Mike Vrabel, I think you keep that win. DeAndre Hopkins and Derrick Henry make this Tennessee offense dangerous, is the way to put it. But I think Cincinnati still takes care of business. Again, it's the Bengals. They're a top team for a reason. They go into Arizona. Again, even if Arizona's home, they don't really have a home field advantage with no Kyler Murray since he takes care of business. And then they host the Seattle offense, or the Seattle Seahawks rather. And I think they take care of business. They're rolling. They're 6-0 going into the bye week. They look like the best team in the NFL, picking up a primetime win along the way against the Rams on Sunday Night Football in Week 3. But then the reality hits, right? Again, their ego could be in the way. Not that Joe Burrow would let that happen to this Bengals club, but their ego gets in the way. They're hearing all the buzz that this is the Super Bowl year for the Bengals. But then they meet 2 Super Bowl contenders. They go into San Fran. I think they lose that one. Then on Sunday Night Football in Week 9, they host the Buffalo Bills, rematch from last year. And I think Buffalo gets the upper hand. I think Buffalo gets the upper hand because they have more to prove in that Week 9 game than the Cincinnati Bengals. and the Cincinnati Bengals are at the midseason mark, I guess for them, they would be 6-2. Still a really, really good record. Trying to compete for the AFC, the number one seed in the AFC, excuse me. But then week 10, they get back on track. They beat Houston. Again, a young quarterback against a stifling defense there in that matchup since he gets the edge. Baltimore Ravens, I think they split with the Baltimore Ravens. They go into Baltimore. Baltimore gets the revenge. In weeks 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, and even 17, I have the Bengals going on another 6-game win streak. Starting in Pittsburgh in Week 12, I think they get back on track after their their loss against Baltimore. They beat Pittsburgh. Week 13, they go into Jacksonville. I think this has the potential to be the game of the year. I think Cincinnati takes care of business maybe late or maybe an overtime game, maybe a really high-scoring game, right? I think this really has the potential to be the game of the year. Hosting Anthony Richardson in Week 14, I think they get the job done there. Week 15, same thing against the Minnesota Vikings, who the Vikings are a very, very good team. I just don't think they're in the contender tier like a team like the Cincinnati Bengals. Going into Pittsburgh, I think they have the win there. Again, Pittsburgh, a really okay ball club. They're just not elite at anything besides TJ Watt, and I think the Bengals can take care of that, sweep the season series. But then Week 17, again, this is another game that could be in the game of the year conversations at Kansas City. We know this is the biggest matchup in sports now, is the Cincinnati Bengals versus the Kansas City Chiefs, or in other words, Joe Burrow versus Patrick Mahomes. But I think Cincinnati can get the edge. Again, in regular season, Joe Burrow's had Pat Mahomes' number. I think he gets it just one more time here, maybe late in Week 17. In Week 18, at this point, I have them only losing 3 games. I think that, they're 13-2 at this point, or 13-3. I think they rest their starters in Week 18. And even as a Browns fan, I'll take it. But I think they're gonna lose Week 18 to the Browns, as the Browns will have something to play for, vice versa of the Cincinnati Bengals. But this is my Super Bowl favorite yet again. So you see a lot of wins here. But I rightfully so. I think they're going to be dominant this year. A 4-2 divisional record. They're in even 2-2 in primetime games. They have 2 6-game win streaks here in this season. I do want to say that they do lose to 3 formidable Super Bowl contenders this year in Buffalo, San Fran, and Baltimore. But they also managed to get a couple big wins, to their own credit this year with the win at Kansas City, at Jacksonville, and home against the Minnesota Vikings. Or you could even throw Baltimore in the mix. They should be in the running for the 1 seed, I think, not even just in the AFC, but in the NFL. And even if they aren't, this is, I think this, come playoff time, this is going to be my Super Bowl favorite. Again, if everyone can stay healthy. So unless something big happens from now to then, Cincinnati will be my Super Bowl favorite. I've said it since the end of last year. 13-4 season for the Cincinnati Bengals. Moving over to the Cleveland Browns schedule. I'm a Cleveland Browns fan, and I'm kind of optimistic for this season. But we have 2 primetime games, Week 2 against Pittsburgh and Week 17 against the Jets. So at the beginning and the end of the year, which I kind of like because there's not going to be a lot of constant light on us this season, and I'm okay with flying under the radar if we're the Cleveland Browns. In Week 1 and 2, against home against Cincy and at Pittsburgh, you saw earlier, I think we start 0-2. There's a lot of narratives going around. Is it time to get rid of Kevin Stefanski? Is it time to, or has Deshaun Watson lost a step? Is he still the same quarterback? Did the Browns give out the worst contract in NFL history? The Cleveland Browns are 0-2, 2 divisional losses. A lot of questions start to stir. But then we pick it back up. I think we host the Tennessee Titans in Week 3. I think we win that one. And then we host the Baltimore Ravens right before our Week 5 bye week. And that's a big game. That's a very big game. But I think we win that one. I think that's the game that really tells us Browns fans that we have a shot, that we can be a sneaky Super Bowl contender. And with that being said, we are 2-2 going into the bye week, Week 5, which I don't necessarily love. I don't necessarily love having this early of a bye week. I think this is the earliest bye week you can have. I would prefer more so at the mid-season or late-season mark. But hey, it's the Cleveland Browns. We'll take what we can get, and I guess we really can't complain anyway. But coming off of the bye week, and this is why I don't like this, is because if there was questions before the bye week, now after the bye week, there's going to be a lot more. You come out of the bye week at 2-2. You host the San Francisco 49ers, maybe the best team in football, and I think they've had our number for the last couple years, and I think they have it yet again, and they probably dominate us. So being 2-3 after 6 weeks, there's still a lot of questions about this team. And again, that facing San Fran right after the bye week is not going to help that. But then we pick it back up against Indianapolis at Indy. We face a young quarterback in Anthony Richardson. I think we win that one. Then we go into Seattle, right, to face the 12th man in Week 8. I think we do lose that one. I think that's a game that we should win, but it's a Browns game to lose on the road in Seattle. So I think we lose that one. But then we pick it back up in the NFC West there against the Arizona Cardinals in Week 9. If you can't tell, I don't think the Cardinals are going to win many games this year. So at the midseason mark for the Cleveland Browns, we are an even 4-4, just mediocrity, right? Mediocrity, I think at this point we would be 4th in our division, but maybe we could pick some things up. Let's see what I think. In Week 10, I think at home against Baltimore, we split the season series, and or I think this is on the road in Baltimore. Regardless, I think we lose this, split the season series against the Baltimore Ravens. Then Week 11, we go into we host the Pittsburgh Steelers, and I do think we win this one. So we also split with the Pittsburgh Steelers in Week 11, and I think that gives us some momentum, right? You just beat Pittsburgh. Now you actually are in the mix. You're 5-5 with 6 or so games to go. Maybe we can pick something up. Week 12 at Denver, again in Mile High, one of the best home field advantages in sports, as we saw with the Denver Nuggets this past year. I think we actually win that game. There's a lot of questions about Russell Wilson this year, if he's the same guy, if Sean Payton can turn it around. I personally think they can, but not to the level of the Cleveland Browns this season. I think we go into Denver, and we handle our business. And then in Week 13, we go into Los Angeles to face Cooper Kupp and the Rams if he's healthy, and we take care of business there. So the first 3-game win streak of the season, the only 3-game win streak of the season, but I think that is a very, very big stretch for us at the end of the year. Week 14, hosting Jacksonville. I think Jacksonville is a Super Bowl contender. The Browns drop that one. Then we host the Chicago Bears. Justin Fields, kind of returning home, as he played for Ohio State. I think the Browns take care of business there, as the Bears are talented, just not as talented as the Browns. We should win that one, but that is, again, a Browns game to lose. Week 16, going back to Houston. And this is Deshaun Watson's revenge game part 2. Last year we won that game. I think we could do the same thing, and Deshaun Watson can get a win here against the Houston Texans. I can't remember if we won last year's game. I actually don't think we did. Regardless, we should win this one, at least in Week 16. But then Week 17, primetime game, our only second one of the year against the New York Jets. I do think they get the better of us. I do think, at home, the Jets come in like last year, and instead of coming back down 30 points in a minute, the New York Jets make this a 2-score game, and maybe the Browns just aren't ready for prime time, is a way to put it. Week 18 at Cincinnati. I talked about it earlier. I think Cincinnati is going to be in a position where they can rest their starters in Week 18. If that is the case, as a Browns fan, we're going to take anything we can get, and we're going to clean up their Week 18, as we'll have something to play for. But as a Browns fan, it's an everyday battle. It's an every year battle. But every single year, we're going to hold out some type of hope, because that's what you do for your ball club. However, I think this team can split their division with every team in the division. They are an overall 7-5 record in the AFC. I think that's going to sneak them into the playoffs, having a 2-game lead on all the AFC opponents. But no big win streaks or droughts for this Browns team. I think it's just a steady overall season for this team, winning games that we're supposed to, and I think that's the key this year. I think we have a top 5 most talented roster in the league. And, on paper, this shouldn't come as a surprise that I have them winning as much as I think they do. But the 2 biggest questions for us this year, what version of Deshaun Watson are we getting? And is the coaching staff, can they put it all together to win at the highest level? Those are 2 of the really biggest questions for this team, and those are 2 questions that could both make or break our season at the coaching and quarterback positions. But regardless, Cleveland Browns, I have them at 10-7, and that makes it my division, as I think the Bengals finish in first. The Baltimore Ravens are second, the Browns are third, and the Pittsburgh Steelers are fourth. Still a very competitive division, as every team has an above 500 record there in the AFC North. Moving over to the NFC North, we're going to start here with a lot of people's favorite team this year. You know, if it's not their favorite team, it's going to be the team they're rooting to succeed the most this year. Again, aside from their favorite team, it is the Detroit Lions, and they have a lot of hope and a lot of hype behind them this year. We're going to have to see if that plays out. They have an amazing 5 primetime games this season, two Thursday night games, a Monday night game, a Saturday game there at the end of 2023, and of course, their patented Thanksgiving game. But their primetime games all start in week 1 from the get-go at Kansas City Thursday night here in a couple weeks, and that's going to be a fun game. But I think they put up a fight. I just don't know if they're ready to face a team of the caliber of Patrick Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs. So at the end of the day, I think they put up a fight in week 1, make it kind of interesting, maybe not. And Kansas City does take care of business in Arrowhead, right? Defending their Super Bowl crown. But they start off 0-1. Okay, whatever, right? You're facing the defending champs, a team that's been to 4 straight AFC title games, maybe the most dominant team of this decade. Whatever, right? You get over that. You host the Seattle Seahawks. I think you take care of business. Seattle, I mean, they're looking to repeat on the success they had last year and build on that success. I just don't think it starts there in Detroit. I think Detroit can take care of them in week 2 at home to get things rolling. And then in week 3 against Atlanta, they have some momentum behind that Seattle game. They keep it rolling against Atlanta. Atlanta has some quarterback questions there. Is Desmond Ridder the guy? I don't think Detroit cares. They have a lot of talent up front on that defensive side of the ball, and they have the talent on the back end to back up their front end. So I think, Desmond Ridder is going to have some problems in this game against the Detroit defense. Detroit 2-1 after 3 weeks. In week 4, in their second primetime game against the Green Bay Packers in Lambeau, against Jordan Love in his first year as a starter. You'll see later, I'm a little bit higher on Jordan Love than most people, and I think this is Jordan Love's first game that we all kind of look at him like, that's Green Bay's next guy. That's their next guy. I think this game is, I don't know what's telling me this, but I think Green Bay blows Detroit out in this game. So after week 4, Detroit is 2-2. They have a lot of questions. Can they escape mediocrity? Can they live up to the hype for once and end this playoff drought? That is going to be the questions that are swirling around this Detroit team early in the season. However, I think week 5, they're hosting the first overall pick in Bryce Young, and I think Bryce Young's going to look he's going to be a completely different quarterback in week 5 compared to week 1. I think after, in month 2 of his career compared to month 1, I think Bryce Young's going to look like a lot better of a quarterback, but it doesn't matter. I think Detroit still goes, or hosting the number 1 overall pick. I think they take care of business there against Bryce Young there in the Panthers. Then they move to Tampa Bay. I can't read the schedule. But then they go to Tampa Bay in week 6. I think they win that game. Whether if it's Baker Mayfield or Kyle Trask, Detroit they should win that game. But then week 7 at Baltimore, I think this is a very big game for the Detroit Lions. And in real life, if we get to this point and they win this game, I think we're going to start to look at them a little bit differently here in 2023. But going at Baltimore, right, going into Baltimore against assuming a fully healthy Ravens team, I think the Ravens get the edge there. Maybe on like a 66-yard kick from Justin Tucker. We know he's good for one of those every single year. I think the Baltimore Ravens will take care of business in that one. Again, assuming everyone is at full health. Then they have week 8, a Monday Night Football game against the Las Vegas Raiders. I'm hoping the Raiders are decent because if not, I don't think this game is going to be worth watching unless you have, of course, like Devontae Adams or Amon-Ra on your fantasy football teams and you need a big game from them on Monday night, right? But in week 8, Monday Night Football, I think they win that game as I don't have much hope for the Raiders this year. So at the bye week, at the midseason mark, week 9, this Lions team that a lot of people think can win the division are sitting at 5-3 in a really good position to take home this division, but they have 2 big games against Minnesota on the second half of the schedule. Can they get that done, right? Can they get those 2 big wins? We'll have to take a look. Week 10, I think they go into Los Angeles to face the Chargers after the bye week. At this point, I think I have the Chargers starting to get going, and I think Detroit might be, subject to a loss here against the Chargers in Los Angeles. Even though the Chargers fans don't travel well at all, if they have any fans, I still think Detroit might drop this one just due to the overall talent of the Chargers. But then they pick it back up. 2 divisional wins in a row. Week 11 and 12, they get a win against Chicago at home. Then they get a win against Green Bay at home. Green Bay, that game there is going to be on Thanksgiving. Of course, I can't go against the Lions on Thanksgiving. Week 13 against the Saints in New Orleans in the Superdome, I think it's called, regardless, or the Mercedes-Benz Dome is what it's called. Regardless, going into New Orleans, I think New Orleans is an okay ball club, and they might just have, an edge here in this game. I think at home, something tells me that New Orleans might win this game, right? Going week 14 against Chicago at Soldier Field, I think they sweep Chicago this year in Detroit. I don't know the last time that's happened. Maybe it happened last year, but I think week 11 and 14, in that month of the season, I think they take care of Chicago, right? Even though Chicago has shown some promise. Week 15 against Denver, at home against Denver. At this point in the year, we don't know what version of Denver we're going to get. So give me Detroit to get hot right before the end of the year. But I take that back. As week 16, I have them going into Minnesota in a key divisional matchup. Minnesota, at this point in their schedule, I believe, is trying to get back into competing with Detroit for the title of this division. I think they take a loss. At Minnesota, Justin Jefferson has a game. Week 16 goes to the Vikings. Week 17, at Dallas, another very key NFC matchup to close out the year. Can Detroit get a big win to clinch a playoff spot? I don't think they do. I think they go into Dallas. Dallas takes care of business, as Dallas is going to have to have an amazing year to compete with Philly for the NFC East title. Detroit drops one here, and they go into Week 18, desperate for a win. Whoever wins this game wins the division. Between Detroit and Minnesota, I have Detroit winning it. And I'm hoping for the city of Detroit that this team can live up to the hype behind them, because their fans deserve it. But in primetime games this year, I have them going an underwhelming 2-3. I still have them winning Thanksgiving, of course, but this is a team that did underperform in primetime games in my predictions. They are still 4-2 in their division, which should allow them to win the division, including that Week 18 win and go home type of game against the Minnesota Vikings. I'm just now noticing it, but it's really kind of like a win-win loss on repeat here for the Lions. As Week 2 and Week 3, it's win-win loss, and it's win-win loss, then it's win-loss, win-win loss, win-win loss, right? So I'm just catching that here. So this is a team that's just very consistent, but just never catches their strides to have a really big win streak this year. But in week 18 again, might be the biggest game of the year. They host the Minnesota Vikings, and they beat them. They make the playoffs. They end this playoff drought for the city of Detroit. So still, overall, solid year for Detroit. I think they end 10-7, winning the NFC North. Moving over to the Chicago Bears, I think this year there's a lot of hype around them. They have a lot of promise this year, hence why they have 4 primetime games this season. I think 5, actually. Regardless, Week 1 and Week 2, I think they start out with a win. I think they host the Jordan Love Packers era, right? They are responsible for seeing the hype behind Jordan Love in his first year as a starter in Green Bay. I think Chicago takes care of business. Justin Fields, There's a lot of hype around this Bears team this year and the improvement of Justin Fields. I think Chicago can come out and take care of business at home against the Packers in Week 1. Then they go to Tampa. They take care of business against Baker. Then they Then they go from Tampa to Kansas City. And of course, I'm not going to have the Bears, right? There's a lot of hype around them this year, but I don't think they're ready for Kansas City in the Arrowhead, atmosphere, right? I think they go into Kansas City. They're not ready for prime time. Kansas City takes care of business. But then they do host Denver. Can they get back on track against the AFC West? I don't think so. I think at this point, Denver still has their head above water. I think Russell Wilson is going to have a bit of a resurgence this year, even though everything tells us that first preseason game that Russ will be maybe even worse than last year, right? But I think Chicago here at home will fall to the Denver Broncos. Maybe Javonte Williams comes back and has a big game in Week 4. Regardless, after the first month of the season, they are 2-2, and they pick up another big win. Week 5, their first primetime game, Thursday night against the Commanders, And last year, they lost to Carson Wentz on a Thursday night game. They're trying to get that out of their system. They're trying to get their revenge on a Thursday night game here against the Commanders and Sam Howell. I think they can do that. But then they host the Minnesota Vikings. Divisional game. You want to continue your divisional momentum as you're 1-0 against Green Bay. But you do take a loss here. I think Minnesota gets their win, but then they go back to week 7, home against the Las Vegas Raiders. There's a lot of questions with Jimmy G in that offense. I think Chicago can keep their momentum going. They win this game. They're an amazing 4-3 after 7 weeks. Again, not amazing, but for Chicago, that's pretty good. Week 8 at Los Angeles against the Chargers. I'm a big fan of the Chargers this year. I think they lose that one. Then they go into New Orleans in the Mercedes-Benz Dome, I think is what it's called again. But I think against Derek Carr and this veteran team, New Orleans gets the edge over Chicago. I do have them bouncing back with a win against Carolina. So throughout 10 weeks, they are 5-5, dead even. They still have hope for the playoffs, but they could also fall off a cliff and be back in the lottery, is a way to put it. But weeks 11 and 12, and this is where I think their season goes downhill. Right before their bye week. They're kind of a young team, ready to get to the bye week, ready to, their mind's maybe not in the right place, whatever the reason may be, or maybe they have some injuries. I think they lose at Detroit, and then in week 12, I think they lose at Minnesota. I think those are 2 really big games for the Bears this year, and I think they drop both of them. So at their bye week in week 13, they are 5-7, not the greatest record. Maybe they can get it going after their bye week, right? But then they host the Detroit Lions, and I think Detroit, as you heard earlier, I think Detroit sweeps the Chicago Bears this year. Detroit, another loss for Chicago, 3 straight losses. But it doesn't get better for them. Then after 3 straight losses and a bye week, they go into Cleveland to, at this point, take on a team that is getting hot, as you saw at the end of the year there. And they lose that one as well, right? So 4 straight losses, including that bye week. This team's morale is very low, but they do get it back on track here. I think hosting the Arizona Cardinals, Arizona might not win a game this year. Chicago takes care of business there. Then they host the Atlanta Falcons, and it might be a shocker here, as I'm a fan of the Atlanta Falcons this year, as I think they can win their division, but not this game. I think Chicago is going to take care of Atlanta there late in the year. Maybe that costs both of them a playoff spot. But then they go to Lambeau to close out the year at Green Bay. I think Chicago might drop that one. So there's a lot of buzz around this team this year. But my opinion has remained the same from before they even had DJ Moore from last year. I believe this is an improved football team, and it's going to visibly show on the football field. But I just don't think the improvement will necessarily lead to the win column, right? I don't think it's going to lead necessarily to the win department, but they will be a better football team this season. I think they're an even 2-2 in primetime games that I have them in. And those are, they're going to be able to show that, hey, we're a young team, but we can win at the highest stages in those primetime games. So they show promise this year. Again, an improved football team. However, I do think due to being 2-4 in their division, I think that's going to be the death of them this year. And I think that's going to be the reason why they, can't make some noise to maybe make the playoffs at the end of the day. But like I said, an improved football team. I'm looking to see huge improvements from Justin Fields this year. No doubt, I think he can do it, especially through the air. But I think they're just a year away or a trade away, in my opinion, from making that playoff noise like Detroit is this season. 7-10 finish for the Chicago Bears. Moving over to Green Bay, I mean, it's insane. They lose Aaron Rodgers, and now they have 6 primetime games this season. Absolutely insane, especially as a Browns fan, because we only have 2 primetime games this year. Regardless, I guess that's what you get for being a part of a historic franchise like the Green Bay Packers. But to open up the year in Jordan Love's era, can they get off on the right foot? I don't believe so. I think they lose to Chicago in week 1. I think they lose to Atlanta in week 2. Not getting off on the right foot. That's not what you want to see from the guy that's supposed to replace Aaron Rodgers, right? But they do get it back on track here. I think they win 3 straight in weeks 3 against New Orleans at home in Lambeau. Weeks 4 at home against Detroit in Lambeau. And then at Las Vegas. Las Vegas is not the greatest team. I think after losing 2 straight games, this is where Jordan Love starts to get comfortable. I think this is where he catches his stride. And his team is 3-2 at their bye week, right, which is the week 6 of the NFL season, as they beat Detroit on Thursday night in week 4, and they beat Las Vegas on Monday night in week 5. This team is rolling. Jordan Love is showing promise that he can win those big games and maybe be their guy going forward. coming out of the bye week, they have a tough matchup in Mile High at Denver. There's a lot of questions about Denver this year, again, as I've said a couple times. But I think Denver in Mile High with that advantage will take advantage of the first-year starter in Jordan Love, and Russell Wilson and them can get it done maybe in a low-scoring game in typical Denver fashion. But then they bounce back. They pick up a win against Minnesota at home. Then they pick up a win at home against the Los Angeles Rams. So far, this team is not the greatest road team, but at home, they are winning their games, as I think they're like 4-1. I have them at home this year, or what is that, 4-0 at home at the midseason mark. So this team is winning their home games with the young quarterback, with the crowd behind them. They are winning their home games, just not so much on the road. That might cost them here at the end of the day. As in Week 10, again, you'll see I have them going into Pittsburgh and losing to Kenny Pickett in that ball club. I think at that point I had Pittsburgh catching a little bit of a stride. Green Bay, not so much. After a promising start to the year, I think that the second half of the year starts off on the wrong foot, just as the start of the first half. As they started off the year 0-2, right? So the first half of the year. The second half of the year, weeks 10, 11, and 12, I have them losing each of those games on the road against Pittsburgh, at home against a really good Chargers team, and then on the road in Detroit. I think Detroit sweeps them this year, or they split, excuse me. But I think Week 12 is a big week for Detroit, and they lose 3 straight to start the second half of their season. But then Week 13 hits, right? Week 13 hits. This team at this point is 5-3, 5-6, right? So this team is 5-6. This is the guy that's supposed to replace Aaron Rodgers, right? This team just lost 3 straight when we had a small chance to make the playoffs. Is he really the guy? But this is where the questions are answered. I think this is the Jordan Love game. Week 13 at home against the Kansas City Chiefs. If you guys follow this channel at all, you know I'm a big Patrick Mahomes guy. Or if you've talked to me in person, you know I'm a big Patrick Mahomes guy. So I don't want to hear that I'm a Chiefs hater or Packers fan, because I'm neither. But I think if there was a Jordan Love game this year, the upset game of the year, it's going to be the first-year starter, the successor of Aaron Rodgers, taking down the best player in football in Patrick Mahomes at home, Week 13, to end their 3-game losing streak. And I think that game right there will tell Packers fans that even though we might not make the playoffs, this is our guy going forward. And Jordan Love, that's going to be the game. Mark my words, Week 13, Packers will beat the Chiefs. And Jordan Love's going to have an amazing year, or an amazing day, I'll say that. Maybe 300 yards and a couple touchdowns. Week 14 at New York. I think they do get back on the losing side, facing Brian Daboll at home against a promising Giants team. Again, I think that game depends on health. If the Giants have some injuries offensively, the Packers easily take this one and get on a bit of a run there. But I'm assuming everyone's at full health. Giants take care of business there at home. But then they go to Tampa, And I think, again, whether if it's Kyle Trask or Baker Mayfield, at this point, Tampa is more focused on Caleb Williams than winning football games. And Green Bay is going to take advantage of that. They're going to win this game in Week 15 to, hey, maybe they're right outside. They're right out in the bubble for the playoffs. Can they do it? Week 15 or Week 16, they do it again. They beat the former number 1 overall pick in Bryce Young in Carolina. They are picking up some noise here to end the year. But Week 17, I have them losing a big game to Minnesota late. And in Week 18, I do have them beating Chicago, right? But I think that Week 17 game is really going to be the death of this team this season, as you'll see here with their record in a second. But in year 1 of the Jordan Love era, I think it's going to shock a lot of people how talented that dude is, as this team is 3-3 in their 6 primetime games, including a huge upset over Kansas City late in the year, Week 13 there. I think they split with everyone in their division, as well as in the primetime games. I think Jordan Love shows a lot of promise, and he shows he is their guy going forward. Now, again, they might not make the playoffs this year, but I think this year the biggest focus is finding their quarterback, or finding out if Jordan Love is the guy after Aaron Rodgers just left after 15 years, more so than making the playoffs. So I think Jordan Love proves that this year, and he's their guy going forward. Green Bay still has a winning record at 9-8. Moving over to Minnesota, and I think this is the last team we talk about, but we're going to still have some fun doing it. They have 5 primetime games after winning 13-plus games last year. Week 1, they're hosting Tampa Bay. Assumingly, it's going to be Baker Mayfield. They take care of business. Then they go at Philadelphia, a rematch from last year's playoffs, I believe. or excuse me, I think last season, right? As Philadelphia handled Minnesota in the middle of last year. But Philadelphia, still the most complete team in football. They take care of business. Philly should be back and better than ever this season. But then they host the Los Angeles Chargers. Not that the Chargers are a bad team, but this is a game where the Chargers would lose. And I think Minnesota, with an improved coaching staff from last year, as we saw, they will take care of business, get back on the right foot. So now they're 2-1. But then they host the number 1 overall pick in Bryce Young. They host this young Panthers team in Week 4 they don't host them, excuse me. I can't read the schedule again. But they go to Carolina, regardless, to play Bryce Young. I think they win that game as they're just better as of right now than the Carolina Panthers. But then they host the Kansas City Chiefs. I got that one right. They host the Kansas City Chiefs, and they lose that one. So in Week 5, you're sitting at 3-2, but you lost to the 2 teams that were in the Super Bowl last year. So are you really upset if you're a Vikings fan? Maybe a little bit that you can't win the big game, but you can't really be that upset as your losses are coming to the 2 teams that were in the Super Bowl last year. Week 6 at Chicago, I think you bounce back with a win, and then Week 7 comes. Week 7, Monday Night Football against the San Francisco 49ers. You lose that one, right? So 7 weeks in the year. I'll keep saying it. You've lost to 3 of the top 4 teams last season. So as a Vikings fan, are you really upset with how your season is going at this point? Week 8 at Green Bay, maybe they're a little beat up from San Fran on Monday night. It's a short week. They're going into Lambeau. I think Jordan Love and them can take care of business in that game. So Minnesota, they're looking down. They need to get back on the right track, and I think they do that. Week 9 at the midseason mark, they go into Atlanta and beat the Atlanta Falcons. That should be a clinic between the matchup of A.J. Terrell for the Falcons and Justin Jefferson. But moving over to the midseason mark, Week 10 rather, as in the first 9 weeks, this team sits at a what is that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 4 record. 3 of those losses coming to Super Bowl contenders, right? It's top teams here in the NFL. Week 10 hosting the New Orleans Saints, they win that one. Week 11 they go into Denver in Mile High, and again, at this point we have no reason to not expect that Russ will be the starter at this point. In Mile High, that's a really big advantage. Denver still has a really good defense. I don't know why. I just kind of picked Denver here to win this game. So Minnesota drops one. I could very easily see them winning that, by the way. Week 12 against Chicago at home. They win that one. I think they will sweep Chicago this season. Then they head into their bye week at 7-5. Week 13, the Lions are rolling right now. Can the Vikings repeat as NFC North champions, right? Week 14, after their bye week, in Las Vegas, they pick up a win against the Raiders. Week 15, they go into Cincinnati against my Super Bowl contender. They lose that at Cincinnati. That's a big game for Minnesota when it comes to their seeding. Week 16, though, they bounce back with a huge win home against Detroit as they seemingly gain control of their division. As in Week 17, they get another divisional win against Green Bay. So 2 divisional wins back-to-back to close the year. They are in a really good spot heading into Week 18. But then as fate would have it, Week 18, it comes down to it. In Detroit, for the division, on the line, playoff spot might be in jeopardy. I think Detroit will edge the Minnesota Vikings out. At least that's just kind of what the fandom is telling me, as I'm not a Detroit Lions fan, but I am a Browns fan, so I know what it's like to be a struggling franchise. So I'm going to have Detroit winning that game, and maybe Minnesota misses out on the playoffs. I think they can still sneak in with their 10-7 record, but they might fall out, right, with how the new playoff system works. But this is a team that won 13 games last year. They're going to take a little bit of a step back this year, at least in the win column. They're still 2-3 in primetime games. It's kind of just how their schedule fell. 3 of those losses were against Super Bowl contenders from last year. They should be yet again this year. They have a 4-2 record in their division. They are still a very good team. I just don't think you can bank on being 11-1 in one-score games like they were last year. And you can't bank on coming back from 36 points against the Colts like you did last year. This is a team that, just like Chicago, I think they're a better overall ball club. I think they're a better overall team. They're taken more seriously, just maybe not in the win column. And with that being said, I think they make the playoffs or maybe right on the outside. But in Week 18, I do have them losing to Detroit. Gives Detroit the advantage for the division. Minnesota might be a wild card team here in the postseason. Who knows? They might even match up with Detroit in the wild card round. Moving over here, just to recap, in the AFC North, I mentioned it earlier, but we had Cincinnati on top, then followed by Baltimore, Cleveland, and Pittsburgh to round out the division. AFC North is the most talented division in football, the toughest division in football. All 4 teams have a winning record. In the NFC North, we have the Detroit Lions and Minnesota Vikings, both at 10-7, but Detroit has the advantage with that Week 18 win. In the third spot for the NFC North, we have the Green Bay Packers, and of course, at the 4th spot, we have the Chicago Bears to round out the NFC North. That's going to do it for today's show, but before we get out of here, another shout out to today's sponsor, Life by Laura. Again, she makes a lot of custom crafts, t-shirts, tumblers. Again, I still have my drink here. I've been talking so much, I forgot to take a sip here of my energy drink, but I just picked it up and it's still super, super cold. So that's always a good feeling as I'm a sipper, right? I don't chug my drinks, and I need something like this to insulate my drink, to keep it cold for long periods of time. So shout out to Life by Laura for doing just that. But that's going to do it for today's show. I'll see you guys tomorrow for a draft strategy video. We have a couple weeks left here until the fantasy football season, which reminds me, if you're interested in joining a fantasy football league here for the channel, go ahead and my Instagram here is on your screen now. Go ahead and go to that Instagram account, drop a follow, click on my latest post, and either drop a comment of, hey, I want in the league, or DM me and just be like, hey, man, I want in that fantasy league. Depending on how much support or involvement we get in the in this fantasy football league, I might even open up a second or third league, depending on how many people are interested. But we have to get moving, as we only have 2.5 weeks left until our drafts. So get a move on it, right? Don't push it off on the back burner. But again, that's going to do it. I'll see you guys tomorrow for a draft strategy video. Until then, stay happy, stay healthy. I'm out.